Imagine walking through the woods at night and realizing the lights above the trees aren't in the sky at all. They're weaving between the branches, silent, deliberate, like they're hunting for something that isn't you. But yet, they know you're there. Now picture a craft slamming into the hillside in a flash of white, military trucks sealing off the road before sunrise, and tall, pale figures combing the wreckage like they own the place. By the end of this video, we're going to follow the evidence that led investigator John Keel to a disturbing conclusion. The beings around Mount Misery aren't visitors from space, they're terrestrials, and this hill might be one of their home bases. Mount Misery, even the name feels wrong. Tucked into the woods near Huntington on Long Island, this hill has carried a bad reputation for as long as anyone can remember. According to local lore and older accounts, native people treated it as a place to avoid, a spot where the land itself felt thin, a border between worlds rather than just another patch of forest. Travelers later reported wandering lights threading through the trees, compasses spinning, horses balking at certain stretches of trail like they were smelling something that wasn't there. Then the 20th century layered something darker on top. Stories circulated of a small mental hospital or asylum near what's now Sweet Hollow Road, a grim facility that, depending on which version you hear, burned down or was shut down in disgrace, leaving the ruins half swallowed by the woods. After that, the strange lights changed. They weren't just ghostly glows anymore. Residents started reporting structured craft, silent objects hovering over the trees, bright orbs moving with precision, and lights that seemed to come up from the forest instead of down from the sky. And here's the core question that still haunts this place. If Mount Misery is just another haunted hill, why do so many threats, UFOs, ghosts, missing time, and those impossible figures in black keep converging on this one patch of Long Island? Could a place like this actually be a doorway into something that has always lived here with us? We're not just asking, is the hill haunted? We're asking, what if the real occupants of Mount Misery were never human in the first place, and we're the ones trespassing? In the 1960s and 70s, the stories around Mount Misery took a sharp turn. People weren't just seeing lights in the sky anymore, they started getting visits. You've heard of the Men in Black, but the ones tied to this hill, they didn't look like Will Smith. Witnesses described something subtly, deeply wrong. They wore stiff black suits and seemed a decade or two out of date, even for the time. Their skin looked waxy, almost like makeup. Their movements were too precise, their voices flat and mechanical, as if they were reciting phonetic lines they just memorized an hour earlier. One Long Island witness told researchers that two of these men appeared in his home after he reported a UFO over the woods. They sat in his couch, backs perfectly straight, asking the same questions again and again about what he'd seen. The color of the lights, the direction of travel, the sound or lack of it. When he offered them water, they stared at the glass like it was an unfamiliar object, fingers stiff as they reached for it. Another account describes a man in black staring at a refrigerator door, confused by how to open it, then acting embarrassed when shown the handle. Little glitches, like someone running a human costume on a slightly outdated operating system. This is where John Keel enters the story. Keel, best known for the Mothman prophecies, dug into Mount Misery as part of his wider investigation into what he called window areas, places where all kinds of high strangeness cluster together. He interviewed witnesses who had seen both UFOs over the hill and these strange men at their door. And Keel noticed something unsettling. The men in black often knew details about the sightings that hadn't been made public, sometimes not even told to close friends. Yet they also seemed baffled by basic human behavior. So what or who were they actually working for? Keel stopped calling them aliens. He stopped assuming they were government agents. Instead, he coined another term: terrestrial, non-human intelligences rooted here on Earth, operating from the shadows of places like Mount Misery. If that's true, then those awkward men in black weren't visitors from the stars. They were field operatives, stepping out of the woods to manage a problem in their own backyard. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, we're going to circle back to the same question that obsessed John Keel. If these beings are terrestrials, what exactly are they, and where on this very hill are they hiding? The sightings and visits might have stayed as campfire lore, if not for the night, something apparently went wrong. In the early 1970s, multiple residents around Mount Misery reported seeing a brilliant flash plunge into the woods. Some described a streak of light, others a sudden burst, followed by a low, rolling rumble that shook windows and rattled dishes in their cabinets. Phone calls went out, some to police, some just to neighbors. A plane just went down, something crashed in the trees. Yet when morning came, there were no official reports of an accident, no mention of a downed aircraft. What people did notice were the vehicles. Witnesses described unmarked trucks and vans blocking off parts of the access roads near the wooded slopes. According to several accounts, there were temporary barricades, men in plain gear, and an air of "you didn't see anything," without anyone ever saying a word. Days later, a few determined hikers slipped past the usual trails and bushwhacked toward what they believed was the impact site. What they claimed they found is straight out of a science fiction set, except no one ever wrote the script. They spoke of a perfect circle of scorched earth, trees singed and bent outward as if pushed by a blast. The ground itself warmed to the touch in spots, no wreckage, no metal. Just signs that something powerful had been there and then removed. And then there were the shapes in the dusk. One logger told Keel he saw tall figures moving through the site days after the supposed crash. Long strides, deliberate movements, carrying objects that didn't catch the light the way you'd expect. They didn't behave like emergency crews or cleanup teams. They didn't hurry. They glided, almost as if they were back on familiar ground. Keel's conclusion was as bold as it was chilling. This wasn't a saucer from another star system falling out of the sky. It was a terrestrial craft, something launched or operated from inside the very landscape, from a hidden facility connected to Mount Misery's long-rumored underground structures. And the rapid, silent cleanup, that wasn't to hide aliens from the public. It was to hide the fact that we might be sharing the planet with another intelligence that doesn't need to come down from the stars because it never left our soil in the first place. So if we take these stories seriously, not as proof, but as data, what picture do they start to paint? Well, Keel believed Mount Misery was one of several window areas, places like Point Pleasant in West Virginia or Massachusetts' Bridgewater Triangle, where UFOs, apparitions, cryptid sightings, and poltergeist-style activity blur together. The idea is that the barrier between our everyday reality and something else gets thinner in certain spots. Mount Misery fits the pattern a little too well. You have glowing craft with no obvious source. We have phantom figures on back roads. We have reports of underground hums near the ruins of a supposed hospital and a hill whose name alone sends people looking for a detour. Some modern researchers link this to what's called the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, the suggestion that at least some UFOs and related entities might belong to a non-human civilization that evolved here on Earth, hidden in remote or inaccessible environments, deep underground, underwater, or in locations shielded from our usual attention. Under that lens, the men in black around Mount Misery stop looking like bumbling government agents. They look more like a local security force. Their weird behavior, confusion over everyday technology, unnatural speech patterns, and eerie lack of emotion starts to resemble something trying very hard to act human and not quite sticking the landing. As for what lies beneath, accounts range from talk of old service tunnels under the hospital to rumors of more extensive sealed-off passageways. None of that has been demonstrated in a way that would satisfy an engineer with a flashlight and a map. But the motif keeps resurfacing. People hear mechanical hums where there shouldn't be any, feel vibrations under the soil, watch their electronics flicker out on trails whose only power source should be the sun. Even today, hikers report odd sensations here. pressure changes, sudden anxiety, the feeling of being watched from just beyond the tree line. Some claim to see pale figures at a distance that vanish when approached. Others snap photos only to find shapes in the background they swear weren't there at the time. Is that pareidolia? Human fear filling in the blanks? Maybe. But if Keel was right, and we're walking over somebody else's roof, then those little malfunctions might be the side effect of brushing up against technology we don't recognize, belonging to neighbors we were never meant to notice. Let's pull back for a second and ask the question skeptics raise first, because it's a fair one. Could this all just be a tangled knot of urban legends, misremembered events, and the natural human tendency to connect dots that don't really belong together? There are perfectly natural ingredients in this stew. Hills get reputations, old institutions really do burn or shut down, and their ruins inspire ghost stories. Lights in the sky can be aircraft, atmospheric phenomena, or even pranks, especially in an area where UFO mania was already in the air. Memory is not a tape recorder. Once a place is branded cursed, every strange sound at night becomes evidence for the legend. That's the strongest non-paranormal explanation. Mount Misery is a magnet for stories, and the more stories it collects, the more new experiences get reinterpreted to fit the mythos. But here's why people like Keel couldn't quite walk away. You have clusters of reports from different witnesses who don't seem to know each other, describing very similar men in black encounters. The strange speech, the awkward movements, the outdated cars, the unnerving knowledge of private sightings. You have multiple accounts that sound like a crash and a rapid, quiet response followed by scorched earth with no official record of any incident. On their own, any one of these could be dismissed. Together, they start to look like a pattern. Not a solved mystery, but a shape in the fog that doesn't fully vanish when you blink. We're not here to tell you this is absolutely how it is. That's not what Phenomenon is about. We're here to lay out what people said they lived through, to treat those stories with respect, and to ask the questions that nag at the edges. And personally, I've read a lot of haunting reports in UFO cases. Very few places manage to mix both with that uncanny, almost human presence the way Mount Misery does. The more you look at this hill, the less it feels like a backdrop, and the more it feels like a character. Here's the part of Mount Misery that might matter more than any single sighting. When you line it up next to other high strangeness hotspots, Point Pleasant, the Bridgewater Triangle, certain valleys and ridge lines in other countries, you start seeing the reoccurring motifs. You get a landscape with a long-standing bad reputation, a mix of phenomena that shouldn't go together: UFOs, ghosts, strange creatures, time slips. Reports of human-ish figures who seem to be managing the situation, not reacting to it. It's as if in certain places, reality frays just enough for something else to leak through, or maybe, like Keel suggested, those are the spots where the landlords step out to check on the tenants. If the cryptoterrestrial idea has even a grain of truth, then the question shifts from, are we being visited, to something far more unsettling. How long have we been living on someone else's world? And how often do they check the borders? So the next time you drive past an innocuous wooded hill with a name that sounds like a warning, ask yourself, is this just another patch of trees, or one of those places where the real owners of the neighborhood sometimes come up for air?